Today, we're looking at a blue ink by Caran Idyllic Blue. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. There's timestamps down below so that you can skip around, but if you got the time, I would appreciate you if you check out the entire video. You can follow me over on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen ink reviews, I would remind you to subscribe. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Jinhao 51A, wrote with it for a day, and used it to take the notes for this video. For the first writing sample, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. There is an additional writing sample that'll happen later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It's definitely offering a lot of shading. The extra fine is a little bit darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, still offering lots of shading and 9 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, still showing us a lot of shading coming through and 14 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both do show us some color variation, a lot more in the extra fine than the medium. The medium is very slight from far left to far right, but it is definitely there in the writing. Tomoe River. No bleeding, very light Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, it's haloed the entire way through. All of it is nice and outlined. No sheen, no shade. The extra fine is just a tad lighter than the stub with no feather spread, no halo, except in a couple of the darker spots. No sheen, and a little bit of shade. Look at how much darker the word the is compared to the word quick. Or quick starts lighter and gets darker. So it is there, just not tons. 14 seconds to dry. The medium is darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. 20 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both shows no color variation, although the extra fine has some. And Rhodia, with no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, only a couple spots of shading. The extra fine is about the same tone as the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, still spots of shading throughout, but not tons. 11 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen. The shading is a little bit more here, but it's more full words, different shades. 16 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows no color variation, although there is some in the medium word to word. I agree with Vita that there's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And this looks to me like a true prime blue. I don't see anything else in there. It starts lighter, it pushes its way up, and as it moves up and gathers at the top, it gets darker. Now the one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And you can definitely see where a lot of this ink started to bond with that filter paper in that first 10 minutes before it pushed up and what was left gathered at the top. There's a chance, but I would be surprised with it being Caran there looks like a chance of some resistance. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, there's no way I would use this in a note-taking situation for the amount of loss of what's there. Not if you want to go back and highlight. Now, that makes sense when you look at what happens with water, which is completely reactivating, lifting it off the paper. It's showing the white of the paper coming through on the left side of where water was. And I did think there was a chance of some resistance with this ink based on the chromatography, but I was wrong. Now, pen flush does everything that water does and nothing more. Far left side, you start to see the white of the paper coming through. Now, it only took water for me to get this out of my pen. The 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the paper, but I didn't need it to get it out of the pen. I test viscosity or flow with a tilt test that I'll link down below in a description or in a card. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Caran Idyllic Blue has a viscosity of 1.34, making it a very wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples. Now for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Caran Idyllic Blue has an average dry time of 14 seconds, making it normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Caran Idyllic Blue, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I went for a nice red and chose Diamine Ruby Red. The second writing sample is done on yellow Rhodia, black and red, and white lines paper. Here we're looking at yellow Rhodia paper. We're not looking at it for tone and performance, for performance so much as we're looking at it for tone, because this is a blue ink, and when we put it with the yellow paper, do we get a kind of a green? And we certainly do. In all of its darkest areas, all of its lightest areas, look at what's going on with the extra fine. You would not have guessed that that was a blue, or with the stub, or most of the time with the medium. Although the medium scrubby, you still might think it's blue. This is something to be aware of if you work in a professional environment where you're writing on yellow paper. Now black and red notebooks, no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, spots of shading, just a couple spots where it's a little bit darker. The extra fine is just a tad darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, still a few spots of shade do show up, very few, 5 seconds to dry. Medium is much darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 8 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby of the extra fine shows some color variation, but it shows a lot more than what we actually got. The medium shows none, and we got none. And white lines paper with no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is the same tone as the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, and 4 seconds to dry. Medium is darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 6 seconds to dry. But this is pretty good for a paper that's not made for fountain pen ink. The scrubby for the extra fine actually is showing a little color variation, although we got none. The medium shows none, and we got none. That is all that I have for writing samples. So what do I think of Caran Idyllic Blue? This does offer some shading, and it does offer quite a bit of tone variation depending on the pen you put it into. But despite all that, every time I wrote with it, I always just felt like there was nothing special about this blue. At its cost, I don't see the need to get a bottle of this blue ink. With so many good blues, this one just felt really ordinary. So what nib and pen give the best writing experience with this ink? I found it dull and uninteresting in everything except a very wet pen. Now I didn't get the same shading there, but at least I got a tone that was more interesting to me. And I wasn't really interested in the shading that I was seeing with this from a medium flow pen. Again, the blue came across quite a bunch as rather dull and uninteresting, and at its price, that just doesn't feel worth it to me. I'm going to remind you that I'm here every day with a new ink review. Thanks for watching.